This is FD Talks, a brand new podcast series by Funeral Directors Life, where we explore ideas, insights, and solutions for serving families in a rapidly changing marketplace. Hello and welcome once again to FD Talks. Today we're going to do part 2 of our 2-part series on hospice care, and we're doing this in coordination with our hospicebasics.org website. We have with us today Melissa Luton. She is with Hendrick Hospice Care here in Abilene, and she is in charge of community outreach. Will you tell us a little bit about what that's about?
Sure. I am the community outreach manager for Hendrick Hospice Care, and that means that I manage multiple departments. Pretty much everything that involves our community. I oversee the bereavement program, our spiritual care department, our volunteer department, our development department, and our marketing department.
In your communication with the public, do you sort of realize that some people don't know what hospice is?
You know, my saying is, and I've been there with Hendrick Hospice Care almost 23 years, and my saying is people really don't know what hospice is unless they work for hospice or they've had a personal experience with hospice. Other than that, it's not one of those subjects where people just are sitting around wanting to learn more about.
Well, kind of describe to me then what it is.
Hospice is, it's really a philosophy. I came to hospice 23 years ago as a marketing coordinator. And so I used to think, what's going to be the hardest part of my job to communicate what basically people think is, death and dying. And I really learned very fast that that's not what it is. It's not just, yes, that's inevitable and that's what happens, but the concept of what hospice provides, the team that hospice provides for our patients, it's very special. It's a privilege for us to be able to walk this journey with them and know that it's also an option. It's a choice, and I like choices. And I think as most consumers, we like choices. And so it's not something that any physician or anyone's going to say, you have to do this. It's an option. So we're actually meeting patients and families where they are in their journey of dealing with an end-of-life care issue that's going to happen with or without hospice.
So I heard you say you have a marketing background. How did you end up in this line of business?
Actually, it was pretty much by accident. I am a graduate at Hardin-Simmons University, and my job right out of college was with the director that was, at admissions at that time. And then he was promoted to hospice. And so he hired me right out of college for admissions at Hendrick Center for Rehabilitation. And then he was promoted and they were looking for a marketing, so I kind of followed him. And then he has since left, but after that it was pretty much I was home.
What would you say is probably the most rewarding part of your job?
For being a marketing person or someone that deals with public relations, there's a very quick turnover, as far as employment. And I tell people, regardless of what people think about hospice or end-of-life care, this has actually been the easiest job that I've ever had. And a lot of it is because of the team. You go out there and you deal with the healthcare, you're trying to educate, the healthcare providers and individuals and the community about what is hospice, and you're trying to paint this wonderful picture, as you should, as a marketer, as a PR person, and really truly show them. And it's the team that's made it so easy, because what happens is if I meet a new physician and I'm talking about hospice and I'm talking about this wonderful team and what we can do for their patients, not once has a physician came back and said, Melissa, you did nothing of what you said. If anything, this team exceeds any expectations that anyone can set by talking about what hospice is. And so that, I think, has been the easiest part, is that it basically sells itself. My regret is, and I think that most team members, I think the hardest part for us is that we don't have enough time. Unfortunately for us and pretty much the nation, the length of stay has actually gotten smaller and smaller. So we don't have as much time to do, I think, and allow our team to do the wonderful gifts that they have.
You were saying a few minutes ago that it's a choice that people make to choose hospice. Do you have some statistics or some way of explaining like how many people make that choice in the United States?
So in 2020 we had in the United States there were probably about 3.3 million deaths. And someone that does elect to get on hospice and utilize services, their average length of stay nationally is about 24 days. When I started in hospice 23 years ago, and the average length of stay was a lot longer. So you actually truly embedded yourself as part of the family. You became part of that family. Now what we see, because we have such a small amount of time to, really learn the family, learn who the family are, and the dealings that we have with the patient. A lot of times what ends up happening is our team is coming in as more of, to do damage control or crisis. Actually, crisis management is probably the best word to utilize. They're coming there and they're trying to manage symptoms and, and trying to figure out really, really quickly what the patient and family needs.
In that time that the social workers spend with families, what are some things that can happen?
In my time at hospice, one of my favorite stories that I remember so dearly and I feel is a good example of what hospice is we had a patient and, he had just retired and he was getting ready to go and travel the world. He was going to drive all through the United States. And shortly after he retired, he was given an end-of-life care diagnosis. And so our social workers were wonderful to come in and say, you know what, they never want to take away any hope, which it seems very hopeless when someone's given a diagnosis, when they had all of these plans, but they do a wonderful job about redefining. And so what happened is his name was David, and he actually redefined and he said, you know what, I would just like to live long enough to see my daughter. She's getting ready to get married, and I would love to be able to see her get married. And so, again, we can't make any promises, and we don't make any promises, but he actually lived long enough. And it took actually our social workers to figure out, it was like, kind of arranging a symphony. It was just coordinated care that they did, that they actually made sure that there was going to be a nurse that was at his side at the wedding. We had a volunteer who was a retired nurse who had elected to, once David got tired, was going to take him home and actually stay with him so the family could enjoy the rest of the wedding. And then we also arranged transportation because he was wheelchair bound. So, it was just everything that they did to be able to get this man to the wedding so he could see his daughter get married. And so there was a lot of moving parts, and that's what our social workers do. I've seen them do wonderful things in dealing with the families as far as mediating, maybe families that aren't getting along, or maybe there's an estranged family member that they have figured out, and in visiting and talking and realizing psychosocially what is going on with the patient and the family dynamics on why things aren't, the communication isn't going so smooth, that they have, gone to many lengths to make sure that that patient has that one last conversation with that estranged family member, if that's what needs to be, so that the patient can be peaceful.
What would prevent a family from choosing hospice care for someone who is in a situation where they're facing end of life?
A lot of times I think for our patients and our families, there's so many emotions that go with, number one, you had mom, she's 90 years old, and just Sunday she was driving herself to church. So there's a lot of emotion that's going on. And I think a lot of times our society, number one, just has never really embraced, death and dying, where there's a lot of other societies that they know that that's a part of life. We're just not one that's actually so open to it. And I think a lot of times too, there's healthcare providers, I think nobody wants to be the bearer of bad news. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a lot of it. I think that there's healthcare providers that, it's very hard. I had a physician tell me one time that said, you have to remember that, physicians go to school and they train for a very, very long time. So it's very, very hard for them to ever say to a patient and family, there's nothing else we can do. Because they have studied, I take my kids to the doctor and I say, hey, fix them. Do whatever you can to fix them. And I want them to fix them. And that's what physicians do. They want to make everything better. And so I think it's very hard for them to break bad news. So I think that it's our job as hospice, as a society, to make sure that we are educating ourselves. And I think choice in education is huge, especially now. And I think as long as people really truly know that that is a choice, and the choice truly is theirs to know that this is an option. If you really think about just kind of healthcare, and in the last few years of where healthcare has gone, hospice is still the biggest gift that anyone could actually give someone. As far as there is a Medicare hospice benefit, but there's still a lot of hospices like ours that are nonprofit that we don't charge our, families for patient care. And hopefully we're not ever mandated. We do a lot of fundraising to do that. But it truly is the biggest gift, because what else can you name that there is actually going to be a physician, a nurse, a social worker, a chaplain, a volunteer, a hospice aide that will go to your home to provide you this care, in your home, surrounded by the people that you love, surrounded by your family, surrounded by things that are very familiar to you. There is nothing else that you can do. With hospices, the Medicare benefit says that we have to provide all of the supplies, equipment, and medications that are related to that hospice diagnosis. So what bigger gift can you give someone or ask for other than coming to terms with the fact that there's an end-of-life care issue and, that death is imminent.
Wow. In your role with community outreach, can you describe the relationship that you have with the funeral homes in your area?
We've always had a long-standing relationship with our funeral homes. They have been so supportive of us, of our families. Something that one of the funeral home directors tells me every time we have dealings with him is he always says that he can tell the difference between a hospice family and a non-hospice family, and that it is just very different, where you have a family just like, Peggy had talked about, walking them through this journey and helping them get the information and educating them, as that time comes with funeral homes and what that will look like for them. Some of the directors that have said that, I've asked that same question. I've asked them, what exactly does that mean? And what they've elaborated to me is they feel that our hospice families are a little bit more prepared for what's happening. They're a little bit more educated on what the process is as far as what the funeral home can do, can't do. And I think that they're coping a little bit differently than those that did not have, hospice to walk them through those last days as far as, answering those questions. They have mentioned that families that did not have hospice or did not have that, education as far as what that would look like, just come, spinning out of control, like don't even know where to start, where ours have maybe already started, going through the process. One of the links that that we give to a lot of is, funeralbasics.com for them to start looking at things. And so I think that's what they mean, that they're a little bit well prepared and they know they already have things kind of put together. But they're always very open. They're very supportive. They bring a lot of seminars and things that they're looking for. You mentioned Alan, Walfelt, and they're always coming and saying, hey, we have this, for you, for your staff. And they're always wanting to take that one step of strengthening that relationship that we have with them. And they're also very supportive with our bereavement programs. We have bereavement programs that we offer to anyone, regardless whether or not they've utilized our hospice. And so they're very supportive of that. And that's after the fact. And so they come and do that. But during COVID, when everything was pretty much the unknown, I think Peggy talked about that ritual. And we knew that for our hospice patients and our hospice team, we knew how we were caring for our patients had changed dramatically. And we knew with our bereavement coordinator, our bereavement counselor, we knew what bereavement was going to look like for them after the death occurred. It was going to be complicated. So we had to know and we had to figure out, well, what is it looking like for the funeral home right now the funeral home and the directors and that community, because they were also given a huge task of no longer being able to gather. What does this look like? Everybody being masked. And so to be able to pick up the phone and just call the directors and say, what are you seeing? What are your plans? How are we going to get through this? How are we going to be able to give our families these rituals or these funerals or memorial service? Because if we don't, they will end up having complicated grief. As it is, they're grieving financial resources, they're grieving, employment, they're grieving, just social issues. And then you put this on top of that. And so it was very comforting to me to know that I could just pick up the phone and say, hey, what do you recommend? What are you seeing? What are you going to, what are your plans? And just like hospice, we had to do a lot of out of the box thinking in order to get us through COVID. And it looked a lot different, but we were able to still provide that same care. And I think they had to do the same thing. They had to, you saw them do wonderful things. You saw them do, multiple things as far as instead of just one memorial service, you could choose this time or this time. There were a lot more graveside, where you could be outside distanced. And so it's them as well working with us and realizing truly these families' journeys and willing to step outside of the box to do it.
That's a great answer. Kind of describe to me, if you don't mind, what do you think the ideal future moving forward relationship between funeral homes and hospice care might look like? Any changes or anything any evolving?
I think for us, unfortunately, because death is going to happen, but I think Peggy had mentioned it, and I think that that's true in all aspects of hospices, is availability. Making sure that when we call or a family calls that they're available and they make themselves accessible to our patients and family. And I think, we care so much for our patients and family. Our team truly does become part of this. They enmesh themselves with these families and become part of their family. And so I think it's very comforting for our team when it's very hard. And Peggy mentioned also that, there is a lot of grief with our team once our patients dies, and we care about our patients and our families. So for us to be able to know that when they're leaving our hands and we're handing them off to someone else, that they're going to carry on that same care and compassion and understanding the way that we had to. And we do live in a wonderful, community, and we've never had any problem of not seeing that. But if they can continue to do that, I think that'd be wonderful. And even nationwide, if more, hospices and funeral homes, if hospices were reassured that, they're going to carry on that compassion that we had.
One of the initiatives that we're working on currently is hospicebasics.org, which we're hoping can be a valuable resource for families to get that education and understand the value of going through this process with a little help. And Melissa, I appreciate you coming in today. I definitely, like I asked Peggy, I hope you'll come back. I plan on following up with you. And thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
If you would like to reach out to us about this episode or this series, please visit us online at funeraldirectorslife.com/FD Talks. There you can find information about this episode and submit any comments, suggestions, or feedback about our series. And we also welcome your ideas for future episodes. Join us next time on FD Talks as we explore ideas, insights, and solutions for serving families in a rapidly changing marketplace.